now in terms of circulation. You know, before the strike, actually before the JOA, which went into effect in the late 80s, the news and the free press between them had a circulation of about 1.5 million every day. Now I think it's lucky if it's, they're lucky if it's 500,000. So for the replacement workers who were coming up from Hilton Head, South Carolina, this was a big jump.
How do you think the strike affected the business end of how newspapers operate? A lot's changed since then. A lot has changed since then.
You bet.
And from what I've read, and it definitely was a little bit biased, that article that I read, but it said that this strike sort of kind of weakened what the labor end of labor management in the newspaper business could, ask for after it.
Yeah, I think it did, because basically when the strike was over, and I think it was in 96, it might have even gone into 97, when it was officially over and the unions, the last of the holdouts came back, and the union got very little for all that time. So yes, I would say it did weaken the position of labor at newspapers, and in fact I believe this was the last newspaper strike in America, certainly the last significant newspaper strike in America. Newspaper strikes used to be fairly common. I went through one in Providence years before. I know people I worked with had been through strikes in other cities, and it was I wouldn't say routine, but it was not uncommon for workers at newspapers to go on strike. Usually they got something for their trouble. And in this case, I can't recall what we got. If we got anything, maybe we got an extra week of vacation, or maybe that came later. It all kind of blurs together because it's been 15 years and we've had several different union contracts since then.
Another thing that I read was that originally the newspapers weren't really going to bring people back. That a lot of the people who had held out were sort of kind of just left out in the cold. And then a few years later there was a court order that pretty much said that the newspapers had to bring these people back or compensate them.
Yeah, the last few holdouts, yes, that's what happened. There were people who took the money. There may have been one or two who came back. Very few in number, the folks we're talking about at that point. A number of people left, got jobs in other cities, either in news or in something else, or they left the business entirely. I had a good friend who left journalism and went to work in the financial field. Has never come back to journalism.
Also, I was wondering if at any point the strike got out of hand. I've also read reports that said that there might have been some destruction of property in some cases. Just that the strike at certain points, I think, I might have the date wrong, but something on June, it might have been July, the summer of 97, I read a New York Times article that said that a small bit of violence had broken out.
The worst example of violence that I knew of, that we all knew of, happened in Sterling Heights, where the newspapers had a printing plant, and there was a very famous photo. The newspaper guild put it up on a billboard and it was of a police lieutenant kicking a striker who was lying on the ground, and a couple of other cops were standing by. Photographer named Damon Hartley took that picture. Most of the violence came from folks on the management side. There were some acts of vandalism I'm aware of. I know that there were some people who would throw what we called star nails. Those were spikes, kind of pyramid-shaped spikes that if you tossed them on the ground, no matter how you would throw them, one piece would always stick up. So when other workers would drive, their tires would get punctured. And I do know of one guy, and this story probably hasn't been told. We had a media room on the 4th floor of the Free Press and the Features department. That was a room with video and audio equipment. So if we needed to screen a videotape in advance to review a TV program, we had the machines there to do that. And I do know of one employee, it wasn't me, who would pick up his dog's poop, and he brought it in and stuffed it into the machine the day before we went out on strike. They never found out who it was, but I know who it was. I'm not telling. I don't have a dog.
There was something I was about to ask like 5 seconds ago.
Oh,
I forgot
it
what it
happens
was.
to me all the time. I'm glad it doesn't just happen to us older people. I'm glad it happens to folks in their 20s. Gives me great encouragement, Greg. I have a picture of a picture. You know, I mentioned the police lieutenant kicking the striker. I have a copy of that photograph with me, and I'll bring it out. This, by the way, is a publication that Michael Moore put out when we were on strike. He came and joined in a big rally at Hart Plaza. But this is the picture that I referred to that Damon Hartley took of the police lieutenant in Sterling Heights kicking the striker who was down.
Okay.
So that.
Oh crap.
So, as I said, there was some real animosity. There was another reporter who was beaten by a guard, a security guard at the Free Press, and he won a big settlement from the company because of that.
I'm just curious. I read about a publication that was put out by the strikers.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, is that it, or
No, this is something different. The publication put out by the strikers I think it came out every week. I know we wanted it to be a daily, but I don't think that ever happened. But it was online. It was one of the first online newspapers. Not that many people could get stuff online, but they put it out online. I can't remember the name of it.
I was also wondering, after you came back, was there enough staff at the newspaper to still perform functions like copy editing, design, not necessarily...
There were enough people, yeah. One of the things that happened was when you came back, almost nobody was allowed to go back to the job they had before. This was the company being passive aggressive. I was a writer, but I had worked on the copy desk, and so they wanted me to be on the copy desk. So okay, I did that. The restaurant critic was put on the obits desk, and she was writing obits, and they were very good. She's a good writer. And eventually, they didn't say this, but eventually we were all considered rehabilitated, and we went back to our old jobs. The restaurant critic went back to reviewing restaurants, and I went back to writing entertainment features.
Was it odd to you or weird that the newspaper was actually becoming part of the news?
Yes. It's always a strange and uncomfortable thing. And it happened whenever there were negotiations, of course. And I know there was a big newspaper strike years before I was in Detroit. This was actually the second strike at the Free Press that I was part of. In 1980, the Republican convention, National Convention, was held in Detroit. That was the convention that nominated Ronald Reagan for president. It was a very exciting time for the Free Press. We had a newsroom set up in Cobo, which is where the Cobo, Joe Louis, that area. And we had our convention newsroom, and we had hired all kinds of interesting people from outside to work with us. Gary Trudeau, the cartoonist, Doonesbury, he was working for us in this convention bureau, and I was working in the convention bureau. And all the national media were coming to town. It was a very exciting time, and a couple of days before the actual convention started, the Teamsters went out on strike. I don't remember what the issue was, as I said, 1980, a long time ago. And we all stayed out in the newspaper guild. We didn't cross the picket line, and so we missed the whole convention. That was a big disappointment. And in that case, the newspaper was the news, but it was minor news given the fact that we had a big national convention in town. So, no, we don't like to report on ourselves. We'd rather report on something more significant. And of course, it's